Hi guys, welcome to a bonus episode of the Underworld podcast, where each week we're coming to you with a new, weird and wonderful crime world somewhere on the planet. This is a interview with Jake Adelstein, who's a great reporter. He's been out in Tokyo for years and years and years reporting on the Yakuza and various other things in Japan. Because he's in Japan, I'm calling him really early here in Berlin. So I'm in my bedroom, and if you hear any sirens or trams, cars, trains, bikes, whatever, that's because everyone's going to work. And it might be loud outside. It's just a few yards away. So with that in mind, let's get on with the show. Hey Jake, how's it going?
Going well, Sean. How are you?
Yeah, not bad, thanks. I'm glad we could connect. I spent a lot of my lockdown reading your stuff, actually. So I was really keen to get you on the show when I was doing a show about the Yakuza. And it's just like a really interesting rise and fall. I mean, the history itself is fascinating, right? But they're kind of like rise to prominence and then the sort of fall that you've written about a bit recently, right? Is quite an interesting curve. So I want to get into your work, like, a bit further down the interview, but I mean, I'm keen to hear from you, like how true this idea that the Yakuza are kind of this fallen from grace power are in Japan.
Well, I mean, the statistics should tell you a lot, and even though statistics can be made to look better or worse than they actually are, I think at the time that Tokyo Vice came out, there were about 80,000 Yakuza in Japan, and now there's probably 8,000. On the roster, which is a significant, they're 1/10 of what they used to be. Maybe, right. Considering people that are hiding their identity, which sounds kind of crazy, right? Like, what do you mean hiding their identity? Don't all Yakuza hide their identity? Well, that's not really true because they sort of exist in the public in Japan. But let's say 10,000 at the most. That's 1/8 of what they were 10 or 12 years ago.
What does that mean? I mean, why? Yeah.
Well, we could go into the long history of it, but I really think that the most significant thing that happened is that starting in 2009, when the head of this is how much of a Yakuza otaku I am. On September 30th, 2009, when the head of the National Police Agency, Ando-san, declared war on the ruling faction of the Yamaguchi-gumi, which was the Yamaguchi-gumi Kodokai, and that he would remove them from public society. That was really the beginning of the end of the Yakuza as we know them. Because Ando-san was talking to an ex-prosecutor named Igari Toshiro. And Igari Toshiro is kind of famous in the world of dealing with antisocial forces. That's a euphemism for Yakuza. But everything, including people that do business with the Yakuza, falls into that broader category. So he had this brilliant idea that, since the Yakuza exists in Japan kind of legally, what if you started putting clauses in contracts that forbid doing business with the Yakuza? In a sense, it kind of goes like this. If you go to Tokyo and you try and join a gym, there is a clause in your contract that you'll have to sign that says, I am not a member of an organized crime group, nor do I associate with organized crime groups, nor have I ever been involved in extorting money from people using organized crime groups. Something along those lines, sometimes shorter, sometimes longer. And if you are, in fact, the Yakuza, and you sign that contract, then you've committed fraud and you can be put in jail. That's just a contract. But
Right.
But then, the police had this idea that was kind of brilliant. The National Police Agency is being the top police agency in Japan, but unlike the FBI, they have authority, but they can't actually arrest anyone or conduct their own investigations. So all these guys got together and they're like, well, why don't we, since we'll never pass a really strict anti-Yakuza law on a national level, why don't we start creating ordinances, prefecture by prefecture, which called Bouryokudan Haijo Jore, which basically are organized crime exclusionary ordinances, which forbid people to do business with the Yakuza and punish them if they pay off the Yakuza. So under these ordinances, which I think the first one started somewhere in Fukuoka Prefecture, Fukushima, um, they're very weak laws, but the laws essentially said, if you do business with the Yakuza, if you profit from doing business with them, or you pay them protection money, or you give them money, or you associate with them, or use their power to gain profit, you are committing a crime, and you will get a warning. The next time we catch you, your name will be publicized. And the third time you do it, you will go to jail or can be fined. And
so it's like a death by 1,000 cuts kind of thing. Yeah.
Yeah. And that was the first time that the police had ever really criminalized the people that do business with the Yakuza. Now, in the 90s, when there was so much trouble with these sokaya, which are these racketeers that shake down listed companies to make sure that people behave at the annual shareholders meetings, they actually put on the law, if you pay off a sokaya, these extortionists, you're committing a crime. And then they busted people from like Nomura Securities and Daiichi Kangyo Ginko and put these people in jail who paid off the Yakuza. But there was never a law across the books that said doing business with the Yakuza is illegal. And these ordinances made that act illegal. And the repercussions of that were, kind of a ripple effect. Because one thing is that the ordinances encouraged people and banks and, telephone companies to put these, organized crime exclusionary clauses in all their contracts. And so in a short time, it took 2 years before Tokyo and Okinawa were the last two prefectures to put these laws on the books. I think it was October 1st, 2011. I remember because it's the day I quit smoking.
So like, does that just cut the Yakuza's cut down the Yakuza's margins so they start fighting each other, right? Because the civil wars have been going on for the last few years. Yeah.
Well, even before the civil wars started, which was started in 2015, what these laws did that was so, pernicious for the Yakuza is a lot of their income, especially from traditional Yakuza, is from protection money. And that has different words. There's mikajime-ryo, which is, basically protection money. There's shobadai, which is, you're paying money to operate in their territory. There's yojinbodai, which is, you're paying for them personal security to deal with unruly customers, to make sure that, and sometimes they give you a lead on when the cops are going to make a raid. That kind of revenue, solid, passive revenue, was how a lot of these organizations function. So let's say you're running an operation in, I don't know, let's say Chofu City, right? Which is a pretty boring place, but you're the local Yakuza, and every bar pays you $300 a month to keep other Yakuza away, to deal with troublesome customers, to collect, to occasionally collect bills from people who are delinquent on paying their bills. And that Yakuza group, if they've got 100 stores in there, or 100 bars or businesses in their area that are paying the protection money, that's a huge amount of money that comes in every month. But suddenly with these laws on the books, you have people saying, "No, I'd love to pay you, but I don't want to be treated as a criminal, and it's illegal to pay you, so I'm sorry, we can't pay you anymore." And the other repercussion is if you were named as a company that was paying off the Yakuza, well, that's where the contract thing comes in, right? So let's say I'm running, Jake Shoji, all right, Jake Trading, and I get caught paying money off to the local Yakuza, and I ignore the warning, I get caught a second time. Then the police or the local prefecture announces my name. Jake Shoji pays off the Yakuza. Well, then suddenly my bank is going to come to me and says, when you signed, up for a bank account with us, you said that you weren't a member of organized crime, or you had no associations with them, or you didn't do business with them, and you violated the contract, so we're going to have to ask you to take your money and leave. And then, SoftBank is going to say, "Oh, you signed this contract for your phone that says that you're not a member of organized crime, and you've been named as one, so we're canceling your phone." So, with no phone, with no bank account, life becomes very difficult. And that is one of the things that has really pushed the Yakuza out of business.
And I guess the cops, or any corruption that was going on between the cops and the Yakuza, right? That's sort of negated because they're going for the other side of the equation, right? I mean, these aren't the guys that are shaking down the cops, maybe.
Yeah, it wasn't, except for Vice, which has always had a very sort of strange relationship with the local Yakuza. Rather than corruption, it would almost be cooperation in the sense that, um, and there's a prosecutor who writes about this in one of his books is, you catch a local Yakuza involved in some kind of extortion scheme, and he doesn't want to go to jail. Um, and he's like, look, if you let me off and you just take one of my underlings instead of me, um, I'll give you 4 guns. I'll cough up 4 guns, and I'll fuck up 4 guns, but I won't give you anybody owner. In police slang, that's called kubinashi kenju, like a gun without a head, a gun without a neck.
That's cool.
If you
Quite
will.
poetic. Yeah.
And those kind of deals were not uncommon. Cops would sort of let off some of the bigger Yakuza in exchange. They'd seize a gun. And in a country where guns are very rare and you have whole divisions devoted to capturing guns or arresting people who deal in guns, 2 or 3 guns seized is a big deal. You've reached your quota for the year. So that kind of stuff, was not uncommon. In recent years, I think that has almost completely died down. But right now, I mean, I know organized crime cops who are like, hurting for work. I mean, they're like actively looking around for anything related to organized crime that they can do. Because you have every police department in Tokyo has an organized crime section within the police station itself. But there are places, like Kanda, which I usually think of as a place to go buy used books, where there are no real active Yakuza offices anymore. First of all, there's no money to be made there anymore. So you don't have a Yakuza presence in your own area, in your own beat. That means you got to go outside other places looking for work.
Wow, that's crazy. And then you get up to 2015 and these civil wars within the Yakuza families. Like what sparked that, and how much did that kind of further sort of cut them down?
Okay, so I'm going to give your listeners a little bit of background history here. So right now, I think there are 22 registered Yakuza groups in Japan. Registered meaning that the authorities recognize them as a significant Yakuza group, and they are subject to regulations about where they can open offices and what kind of business they can do and how many of them can meet when and where. And if a Yakuza group behaves particularly badly, they are designated an especially dangerous organized crime group, in which case they can't even use their offices. And so the Yamaguchi-gumi is the biggest, or it still is. It was and still is the biggest organized crime group in Japan. It was founded in 1915. At the height of its power, it had 40,000 members. So, but the Yamaguchi-gumi is not you think of this monolithic organization. They have offices in Kobe, and the office is like a city block. For 20 some odd years, they used to have a Halloween party for all the local neighborhood kids. It was very popular. I've only been once or twice, maybe twice.
What's it like?
Oh, it's great. I mean, they put up great decorations and they hand out candy and they have little booths, like going to a little carnival. I mean, it got better every year. Unfortunately, this year they actually they changed the local organized crime exclusionary ordinance to ban Yakuza from handing candy to kids. I mean, sort of like you may not give candy to children or invite them into your premises anymore. So
that's really the final blow.
Yakuza Halloween has been completely canceled. I know some kids who are going to be very disappointed. Some Indian kids who live near Doha, and there's some kids going to international school. This was a big deal for them. It's just, I mean, not only do you have to deal with COVID, but which makes staying at home. I mean, I guess you can wear masks. Really, nobody's going to go trick or treating. But the best party in town has been canceled forever.
That's the fat end of cancel culture.
Yeah, the fat end of cancel culture. Okay, but I digress. Moving back. So the Yamaguchi-gumi, very powerful organization. but not, one happy family, because there, I think the Yamaguchi-gumi at its height had about 100 factions. It's a pyramid structure. There's the group at the top, sort of the ruling board, and then under them there's second tier groups, and then the third tier groups. And there's like about 100 people at the very top of this pyramid of 40,000 who are directly under the boss. The word for them in Japanese is jiki-san, like direct participants,
Right.
direct subordinates. And, you had, in the past, you had Goto Gumi, you had Kyokushin Rengo, Takumi Gumi, and each of these organizations, which had branches under them, the Kodokai being the ruling faction of the Yamaguchi Gumi at right now and at the present, and the Yamaken Gumi being the second largest organized crime group that had control of the organization for a very long time. All of these groups have their different areas and their different territories and their different specialties. And of course, they don't really get along very well. So the Kodokai, which is the largest faction based in Nagoya, since Tsukasa Shinobu took over as the leader on August 26, 2005, they'd given themselves all the prime post, and everybody under them had to pay tribute to the top. And the cost of the tribute was, progressively higher. So there was a lot of disgruntled Yakuza, and also people felt that they weren't being promoted to the top the way people in the Kodokai were promoted. So before this rebellion in 2015, this big split in the Yamaguchi-gumi, in 2008, in October, Godo Tadamasa, this Yakuza boss who was a really ruthless, horrible person, he's kind of famous for orchestrating an attack on the film director Itami Juzo, who made a film about the Yakuza which did not portray them in a very positive light, called Minmo no Onna. So Godo Tadamasa and a couple of his underlings were sort of plotting a coup d'etat. But Godo got kicked out of the Yakuza, and partly because of an article in a book I wrote, but there were many other reasons to get rid of him.
This is your UCLA reporting, right?
Yeah, and also I would have to say that the article in which he was shown hobnobbing with celebrities that appeared in Shukan Shinsho, that I had some small part in that article as well. That was another thing that got him in a lot of trouble. Anyway, so he got kicked out, and then all the people who had pledged allegiance to him and sort of wrote a letter of protest, very quickly, because the Yamaguchi-gumi is sensitive about having a conflict. They, I think in the 80s, they had a split in the organization. It was and it turned into a bloody civil war that lasted about 3 years. So when the top realized that Godo was sort of plotting a rebellion and was going to take people with him, all the people that rose up to say, hey, you shouldn't kick him out, and protested against the way the organization was being run, they were all expelled or put on, sort of banished permanently. Are basically told to stay home, just Kinshin Chobun. And that completely wiped out the upper echelon of a lot of the Yamaguchi-gumi. And the Kodokai kept its grip on power. But resentment simmered for a very long time. And these were, and just like in sort of a classic suspense film, not only does resentment simmer and people were kind of plotting to break away and create a new Yamaguchi-gumi, including the top dog of the Yamaken-gumi, which used to be the ruling faction of the Yamaguchi-gumi. The police were kind of backing them up, because Yamaguchi-gumi, that is split in two, is a weaker Yamaguchi-gumi, and it's something that powers them. Meanwhile, all these top bosses that got kicked out of the Yamaguchi-gumi, including Ota of Ota Kogyo and Godo Tadamasa of Goto Gumi, they were willing to put in money and power and back this split. And so, on the 10th anniversary of Tsukasa Shinobu, who is the head of the Yamaguchi-gumi, coming to power, Inoue, who is head of the Yamaken-gumi, like still this is faction in the Yamaguchi-gumi. Yeah, his headquarters, they created a new Yamaguchi-gumi, which they called the Kobe Yamaguchi-gumi. After the fact that the Yamaguchi was founded in Kobe, and they said, we're going to bring the Yamaguchi-gumi back to its glorious days, to its honorable days, to make a better organization where young people have a chance to rise up, where the distribution of power is more even, where everyone will have a say. A kind of more democratic, benevolent, younger, friendlier, more traditional Yamaguchi-gumi. And when they had their ceremony, the police were all outside, the headquarters, protecting them from attack by the Yamaguchi-gumi. And it looked like the Kobe Yamaguchi-gumi was going to win. They were younger, they had the power, they seemed to have a good rationale for what they were doing. But by 2017, there was a split within the Kobe Yamaguchi-gumi because it turned out they weren't, it's kind of like meet the new boss, same as the old boss. Nothing really changed very much. And one of, the young bloods, Oda Yoshinori, kind of the number 2 to the head of the Kobe Yamaguchi-gumi. Oh, I'm sorry. That is my talking robot vacuum cleaner in the background.
That's the most Japanese thing you could have ever said.
Yeah, I know. Kokorobo responds to voices sometimes. I don't really know what sets her off these days, but she's getting old, and sometimes when I say things, she starts moving and cleaning, and I really could replace her with something new, but over this 10 years, I've grown affectionate. I'm just going to keep her around until she can't move anymore.
Most people are complaining about Alexa playing the wrong song, but you've got a fucking robot cleaner.
Yeah. When it terrifies people sometimes when they're talking, and then suddenly, she's like, hi, and starts moving around the room. Anyway, back to the Yamaguchi-gumi.
Yeah.
So now you have a 3-way split. You have the Yamaguchi-gumi, the Kobe Yamaguchi-gumi, and you have the new group called itself the Ninko Yamaguchi-gumi. Kill means like chivalrous way, honorable way. It's like calling yourself like the humanitarian Yamaguchi-gumi. And so with this 3-way split, they have been, very, at times very violently and at times very subtly, killing each other, and shooting, members and vying for territory. But the result of all this conflict was that, the police have declared Kobe Yamaguchi-gumi and the Yamaguchi-gumi and the Yamaguchi, and I think they changed their name to Kizunakai, the third group, to be especially dangerous organized crime groups. And in many places in Japan, the members cannot even meet. If I can get more than 2 or 3 members meet at a place, they can be arrested for violating the organized crime control laws. So that has been extremely bad for business.
Right. And so between these kind of twin things of the police cracking down and then sort of destroying each other, then now it's kind of reduced to, I mean, what's their kind of like, popular perception of the Yakuza now in Japan then? Are they seen as quite weak, or?
Well, they're seen as definitely much weaker than they used to be. And they have really migrated into wire me the money fraud, and really kind of scummy activities that the Yakuza traditionally didn't associate themselves with: common theft, armed robbery, smuggling, and especially these kind of fraudulent activities which prey on old people. The classic being, you call up someone and pretend to be their son or the grandson and get them to give you money. A kind of fraud in Japan that has been called "Hey Mom, it's me" fraud, or "Wire me the money" fraud, and now it's just called special fraud. These are increasingly the things that you see Yakuza getting involved in.
So just just common or garden kind of
common or garden
thug kind of stuff.
No honor, no dignity. I mean, traditionally Yakuza, the main revenue was extortion, protection money, racketeering, blackmail, kickbacks. Kickbacks on Taijobu deo. Sorry, that's Kokoroba talking to me. And the Yakuza are not Taijobu, but I'm Taijobu. And and the kind of you know intervention in civil matters. So if you had a dispute with someone, the Yakuza would often sort of, if you paid the money, they would step in and solve the dispute for you faster than you could get and go through civil court. And we're talking about kind of disputes like you built your fence on my property, remove it, and your neighbor says, screw you, and you go to the local Yakuza and say, like, hey, this guy built his fence on my property. Um, and the Yakuza would say, well, I'll how much do you think it would cost to fix it? And you tell them, and they go lean on the person, and then they take half of whatever the person pays, give you the other half.
Mm.
That kind of stuff. So they're kind of like security, in-house lawyers, and of course drugs. But drugs have never been as biggest part of the revenue as the police have alleged. I mean, Japan is not a nation of addicts. You see people. There are definitely people taking drugs, and sometimes I've been surprised at bureaucrats being caught taking drugs and meth. But generally speaking, this is not a country with a huge drug problem. So since it's not a huge drug problem, it's hard to believe that that's a huge source of revenue for the Yakuza.
Okay. So I want to get into your kind of like how you first encountered the Yakuza yourself. I mean, you came from Columbia, Missouri, which isn't like a spitball town, but it's compared to Tokyo, it is. And you lived in a Buddhist temple, I think, for several years, and then you went into work for the Yomiuri Shimbun, right? And
right.
You were kind of thrown into this. I mean, the way you describe it in Tokyo Vice is like it's this very just like vivid, mad, colorful world of very outsized characters on the crime beat. I mean, what were those first few months working this beat like, and kind of how did it shape up to what you expected to see in that kind of world in Japan?
Well, in the first year, I was covering like 3 or 4 police stations, and that at least I got to spend a fair amount of time by myself. I would go to the police station, see what's happening, work on those stories, do other things. When my second year, when they decided who would stay and cover the Saitama police proper, I was assigned to cover the Organized Crime Task Force 1 and 2, and also theft and I think public security. And then I basically had to show up at the police headquarters every day, and anything that related to my area and anything and any major crime, I would also be sent to help cover. I got really busy, and I spent a lot of time like meeting the organized crime cops, and eventually going drinking with them, going to their houses, getting to know them, learning that there were 4 different squads, one for each direction, and cultivating context. So I knew what if the South Division was working these cases, the North Division was working these cases, the East Division was working these cases, and then trying to get the East Division to tell me what the West Division was doing, so that you could sort of be on top of everything. And actually, that strategy worked pretty well, because a lot of cops are really reluctant to tell you what they're working on, but they're not so reluctant to tell you what someone else is working on. And once you know what someone else is working on, and you sort of talk to them, they kind of assume that you know more than you do, and then you just need to shut up, and ask like, how's the Bakamasa case going? And that was really interesting. And I think in my early on, and I always wondered how this happened. There was a Yakuza boss who, called the office and asked to speak to me because he was having some problems with the Saitama police, and he wanted me to be his emissary to the police and figure out why they were being so standoffish to him, which is still one of the strangest things I've ever experienced.
Yeah,
but as a reporter, that's just like incredibly good luck, because I was able to cultivate that connection into something good. And and as for the Saitama policeman, you tell them, or I told my police contacts directly what was going on. Um, there was one cop who sort of liked the Yakuza who was in trouble and was like, okay, I'll tell you what's going on and you can tell him, don't tell him it's from me directly. And, uh, that would be good because of the Yakuza that are operating that organization, he's the one we want to keep alive. I didn't really realize until later that he wasn't being metaphorical. But man, yeah.
I mean, you must have had like ideas of. I mean, I guess most Americans listening to this will have ideas of like the Italian mob, now it's portrayed in the media and that kind of world and Godfather and whatnot. But like, it's different in Japan, right? I mean, did you go in with that kind of idea in your head as
I mean,
well? Like, how are you surprised at
I,
this
I,
new
I,
world?
I didn't know much about them, but I'd seen like the movie The Yakuza, and I've seen Mean Bologna. Um, and I did see, they had the suits and the discipline and the tremendous formality, and all the and the black cars, the Mercedes, and you know they really do have gang wars, and they do plot, chide for territory, and they blackmail people, and they're powerful. But at some levels, when you get to know them and you learn like what daily life is for like Yakuza, I was thinking like it's a it's like these guys are constantly hustling for money and have to pay their dues to the top, and it's a hard life. It's a hard life for the guys at the bottom, and it's a you know in some ways over time I kind of feel sorry for them because there were days when you're in the early days in the 90s, being a yakuza was like you just went to the businesses that you collected protection money from, collected the money, gave it to the boss, and called it a day. You're making your rounds, and occasionally you have to go to funerals and uh, ceremonies and things. But once you were past like being a freshman, sort of earned your wings. Life could be fairly regular.
Right. I mean, and you mentioned like in the book that a lot of the cops they kind of have this affinity with them in some way, right? Because they feel like they're all kind of working class guys. I mean, a lot of the yakuza come from sort of foreign minority groups, maybe, or traditionally, even historically, like groups that were shunned somewhat by a Japanese society. So they're they're like really they're thought of it by the police with some deal of respect. Is that kind of the case?
Well, yeah, yeah, but if some of the cops respected the yakuza who because they were tough and they didn't complain and they endured a lot of and they had endurance, and in a very macho world, where silence and discipline and and the police itself is a very hierarchical society where you know your superior you have to really coddle to and listen to what they say. And, there's not a lot of independence allowed. Um, they sort of the yakuza structure sort of parallels their own. Um, and I think because the job is so strange in the yakuza in so many areas of life, um, the cops doing the yakuza beat tended to be sort of look like the yakuza. I know there's one cop, who really smart, but he wanted to do theft, right? That was what he wanted to do, theft or white collar crimes when he became a detective. And so when he finally made the grade, his boss called him and said, "Okay, I'm assigning you to the organized crime task force." And he was like, what the fuck? Like organized crime task force? That's not what I want to do. And his boss said, "Go look in the mirror." And he looked in the mirror, and he's got such a typical yakuza face. He's like, "Yeah, okay, I see why."
So everyone's, I mean, yeah, this hierarchy. I mean, like the Yakuza is notoriously, like, really, really strictly structured, right? I mean,
Right.
how difficult was it for you getting, beyond the foot soldiers into the kind of, middle managers and then up to the kind of bosses? Like, how long did that take for you at first?
Well, because I had met someone very top in an organization and sort of had a referral, so to speak. Um,
Uh-huh.
and also I'm a newspaper reporter, right? So, for middle management, the mass media is something that is good for them to know because it kind of goes like this. I wouldn't say it's a symbiotic relationship, but you're a Yakuza boss and you have someone you're blackmailing and they won't pay you the money or they won't pay you the extortion money, or that your rivals are deep in bed with another politician and you want your rivals to suffer because they're eating into your territory, then going to a newspaper reporter and goes, hey, you want, I got a juicy scandal for you here. That benefits them. So as a reporter too, I'm like, okay, I know that this information, you have to clarify. Okay, I don't want to know why you're giving me this information. I just need to know that it's valid, and I want you to know that I'm like, you're not doing me a favor. Like I'm, if I write this up, it's because you want me to write this up, and so I'm doing you a favor. So you owe me, unless there's some extenuating circumstances that I don't understand. Like I'll take this information and I'm grateful. I appreciate it, but don't for a second think that now I owe you, because I know you wouldn't be giving them is that there wasn't some advantage for yourself in doing it.
I mean, how much did the fact that you are a big white guy from America, did that help you? Did you feel like that helped you much at the start?
The Korean Yakuza, right? And there's Koreans all across the board, 30%. They were kind of like, oh, once you'd explain to them, like, actually, I'm Adelstein is a Jewish name. They would be like, and you sort of have to sometimes explain to them what it means to be Jewish in,
right.
America. They're kind of like, oh, so you're kind of like us, right? You look white, but you're not really white, and people sometimes discriminate against you because they think you're responsible for, all of this because of all these bullshit conspiracy theories. Like, yeah, you Zainichi, you're like the Jews of Japan, and they, and so there was a weird affinity, like you understand us, we understand you, like we have something in common.
Right. That's really interesting. I mean, and I think another thing that listeners would be interested in is how you would describe soapland, because that is a word that doesn't necessarily conjure a negative image until you realize what it is, and then it becomes pretty grim. And a lot of Tokyo Vice is based around it. So yeah.
Well, it used to be called Turuko, like Turkish baths, until one of the dignitaries at the Turkish embassy in Tokyo protested vigorously. That
good diplomatic work.
This is not something Turkey would like itself to be associated with. And then they had a contest and came up with the name of Soapland. So Japan's laws, adult entertainment laws, essentially allow every sexual act except vaginal penetration to be offered for money. So that's why, in Kabukicho the other day, I was surprised to see that they had a sign up for a sort of adult entertainment information center, and they had a sign out in English that said like blowjob shop, titty bar, strip club, question mark things in English, right? And I was like, oh well, that's progress, I guess, because and they're just listing the things you can offer legitimately, right? And Soapland are places where prostitution is essentially legal. Now, when they phased out the Soaplands in the 50s, they essentially, didn't ban them, but they created a law that you can't make new Soaplands. So I think there's like 1,015 left in Tokyo. 1,015 left nationwide. Soapland is a place where you go in and ostensibly you're paying for the price of a bath, for a woman to bathe you and scrub you, using her body as a sponge, or using sponges or whatever is around. But
it's it's becoming clear now.
But
yeah.
But technically, you go into the other room, and if you negotiate and she and you hit it off and you have sex, that's considered, this is direct translation, free love. In which case, it's not illegal, because the price of that free love is not included in the price of admission. So what you pay to take a bath there and what the stated rates are do not include the actual sexual intercourse. And that money that you pay there, or you may or may not pay there, because that is free love, not part of what something the business itself controls. Therefore, it is legal, and that is so planned.
Right, and that's kind of
a sensual bath and actual intercourse.
and that's, I mean, that kind of, at least from an outsider, that is very interesting in this kind of like image that we have of Japan of being this kind of like dual permissive and prudish kind of society at the same time, right? I mean, how does that, is that kind of what it is there? I mean, how would you kind of describe that?
I mean, okay, Japan is prudish and permissive at the same time. For example, sex work here is legal, but the government refuses to give COVID compensation money to adult and sex entertainment related businesses, for which there's now a lawsuit. Because there's no valid reason not to do that, except that conservative elements like the LDP, even though they are probably the guys that go to these sort of sex parlors the most often, tend to disapprove of these things because I think authority figures always fear sex, because sex seems to undermine totalitarianism. I don't know why.
Yeah,
but
yeah. Interesting.
I
mean,
so yeah, it's got prudish and very, you still have nudity on Japanese TV. You still have the newspapers, sports newspapers still have 3 or 4 pages of lewd, like, sex stories and racy photos that you can buy on the newsstand, what they call the pink pages. And the delivery health, which is the Japanese word for escort services, all those businesses are booming. They did very well during COVID. It's a huge part of the Japanese economy. Yet, that stuff is generally frowned upon still.
I see. And is the Yakuza still pretty active in that world, or has that been kind of extricated from them?
They've never been in Kawasaki. The Inagawa Kai owned a couple soap lands, directly running them. Usually, the sex trade, since it can be legal, the Yakuza are just taking protection money. It's not something they've run so much. Now, there was a time from maybe 2000 to 2010 or so when the Yakuza were really involved in human trafficking, both in and out of Japan. But as laws in Japan went on the books that made the risk for that much higher, the penalties much higher, that's a business they got out of, because it's about profit. So if you can't make money, you can't make money, or the risk of having one of your organization members go to jail for a very long time, which you have to take care of them for engaging in human trafficking, goes up, they pull out of that business.
Right. So tell us, I mean, did you ever feel genuinely like scared for your life while you were covering the Yakuza? I mean, were there moments where you thought, oh shit, this is going to get me in a world of trouble? I mean, it always seems like you're kind of skirting that line in your writing. I mean, so I'm keen to know, like, if any of those episodes sprang up.
I have been in an office and talking to someone about a very sensitive subject, and I heard noises in the back room, and I thought, like, wow, I am really, I mean, I had one conversation where I just felt like, wow, I may not walk out of here. So and I wouldn't say nonchalantly, I said, before I got here, I sent a picture of where I'm going into to 1 or 2 cops, just so people know where I am. Just thought I'd put that on the table.
Were the threats that you received kind of on the down low then? Were there never any explicit, like, shut up or be shut up kind of thing?
I mean, I got a very, Yakuza never threatened you directly. Like, I'm going to kill you. I mean, maybe they do it to some reporters. I mean, I've had a talk with emissaries from Godogumi when it was still an organization that they wouldn't be very happy with. I wrote an article about their boss and his liver transplant, implying that I should either erase the article or they would erase me and my family. But once again, they do that in a very subtle way. And I have had, in I think 2009, I was going to speak to a source who was a meth addict, and he was really hepped up. And I don't know what I did to set him off, but it turned into this ugly, nasty brawl. And I got kicked in the head, and of course I fought back because you're not going to let someone kick you to death. And that was extremely unpleasant. I mean, there was a time I thought like, wow, am I going to get out of here alive? But I was the one person who left standing. I called an ambulance and for him, and limped home, and then went to the hospital the next day. But like it's a strange thing to be a crime reporter when your sources are criminals, because okay, I mean, I don't want to condone drug use, but all right, the guy was high as a kite on meth. Can I really hold him responsible for his actions? And if I turn him in, then I've blown my source. So what do I do? So I don't do anything except, when he was getting ready to get out of the hospital, went and talked to him and said, like, this is really unacceptable behavior on your part. And he offered to pay, my hospital bill, which wasn't much. I certainly didn't offer to pay his hospital bill. And we sort of reconciled, and still in touch. But obviously, I look at him like a live bomb, even if he seems to have been on the wagon for a couple of years now.
Right. So I guess to bring everything full circle, like your second book, the Last Yakuza, revolves around Makoto Saigo, someone you kind of met through happenstance, really, and kind of what does he? I mean, how did you meet him first off, and how does he really, for you, represent sort of a dying breed of Japanese Yakuza?
Well, I kind of met him because I'm gonna abbreviate the details here, because I was kind of schlepping a dead Yakuza's mistress. But her.
You can go on the details there.
No. That was like the sort of the beginning of how I met him. Then years later, I needed a bodyguard, and he'd just been kicked out of his organization, mostly for not paying his association dues. And I was like, "Would you like a job?" And he took the job. Though his reasons for taking the job I didn't really understand until many years later. But that would spoil the book for people if they ever read it. But he didn't just take it because he needed a job. He's a traditional because he had a lot of meth problems when he was young. He was smart. He ran a kind of standard sort of protection money racket, and sometimes fraud. Whatever came his way. Generous to people who needed money. Liked within his own community. But also, hot-tempered. A little hard to deal with. And I think, in his case, a series of violent gun battles in his area and a police crackdown on the Yakuza that resulted from that really sort of drove him out of business. And without any other income and the ability to pay his association, sort of shoved to the side. I think it happens to a lot of Yakuza. They sort of go out of business because the business dries up. If people aren't paying protection money, and that's been your racket, if that's been your main gig, and you can't adjust, and you're not someone who's able to pull off financial crimes, or are not interested in pulling off this kind of really venal fraud that preys on old people, where you pretend to be family members, or get them to give you cash because you appear to be in a tough spot. I think you can't survive.
Right.
So
right.
The traditional Yakuza had things that they would not do, and the things they would not do were usually written on the wall as the things that would get you expelled from the group, and those were theft, robbery, that is stealing things with force,
and that's really not the case now.
Sexual crimes, and fraud. but fraud wasn't written up because it was, that's not something that Yakuza do. But extortion and blackmail have always been okay. Blackmail is okay because if you're doing something so bad that the Yakuza can blackmail you about it, then they consider that social justice, right?
They're social justice warriors, yeah.
They're social justice, yes. Social justice warriors before social justice warrior was a word.
Okay, I mean, Jake, I guess I've taken up a lot of your time. I guess I should leave it there. But what are you working on right now? I know you've got you spoke to me a while back and you mentioned that you might be writing a second Tokyo Vice. So I don't. Are you
so
on that case?
I am writing. And it has not been officially announced, but I am working on a book, tentatively Tokyo Private Eye, about a sequel to the first book that also overlaps a little bit at a time when I was doing a lot of work, doing investigations into companies run by the Yakuza on behalf of financial institutions that needed to either cut their ties to the Yakuza or didn't want to get burned by them again.
Right. Okay, so that's pretty exciting stuff. Yeah. So I mean, I guess we'll find out officially about that. It's soon.
I'm trying to make it as to explain to people like how to do a corporate investigation, and people like guns and blood and stuff. And of course, there's some gory crimes and things that go into this book, but the nitty gritty of like figuring out whether a company is baked or not can kind of be boring. So I'm trying to make it as exciting as possible. But but the book will also, deal in some ways with all the things that happened and the backstories of the people involved in basically putting the Yakuza out of business.
Cool. I mean, yeah, I think that people think that investigative journalism is quite a glitzy, glamorous job at times, but I spent about 4 hours looking for the former employees of a company yesterday, so that's your bread and butter. Yeah.
There's nothing like looking through a corporate registration and going back through 5 of them to find out who originally founded this company. That's the part of the work that you hope that will show up in a montage at least.
Yeah. Cool. Well, Jake, thanks ever so much for talking to me. It's really, really fascinating hearing all your experiences and thoughts on the Yakuza.
I don't write very much about them anymore. Yesterday I was in. This sounds so stagey. Like yesterday I was in Kabukicho. Well, I was only in Kabukicho because I have to deal with some of the actors that are going to be in the TV series. Why not deal with them? It was nice of them to reach out to say they wanted to meet me, and some of them are actually still working in that area, so it was kind of nice to visit them. But there was a guy who used to be in the Kodokai who's now working as a bartender, and I was just talking to him, and and we were both like, yeah, man, that day is long since gone. Nobody wants to do that job anymore.
Wow. That's crazy, really. Yeah, given it's got this kind of such a rich history going back centuries.
In a couple of years, I feel like I've got hundreds of books and magazines and videos and paraphernalia, and I'm just feeling like I'm going to have to open a Yakuza museum or just dump all this stuff.
You should do that.
Practical value of it. The practical value of it these days is not much. There was a time when that stuff would have been really valuable, and these days I'm like, I need a barn or I need a museum.
Well, good luck building your museum. Good luck with the new book, and good luck with the robot as well. Maybe you can get it to clean up now. We're off the phone. Come on. It's a pleasure speaking to you, Jake. Cheers.
You're welcome, Sean. Okay.